Well, hello there. Thanks for joining in to Saturday Sidedress. I'm your host, Scott from Crescent Soil Services. Today we've got a special guest. We have one of the respected elders of organic agriculture to bring you farming information from around the world. Take a moment to sit around for a fireside chat with us as we cover the information needed to help you recover from a recent failure and help you, the farmer, reclaim your power as a steward of the land. Our guest Dan is the executive director of the Bionutrient Food Association and the Bionutrient Institute, which were started to execute his vision of increasing quality in the food supply. Dan has taken this message around the world, teaching workshops and educating farmers, which focuses its effort every year at its flagship event, the annual Soil Nutrition Conference. Dan has spent his entire life on the front lines of the organic food movement and has solidified himself as an expert in the world of nutrient density and biological or regenerative agriculture. Through his mission, the Bionutrient Institute was launched to demonstrate the connections between nutrient density in soil, plant and human health, and has partnered with other research organizations to create a handheld consumer-level device that measures nutrient density and, in my opinion, in the near future will force all farmers to up their game. Welcome to the show, Dan Kittredge, the man with the master plan. How you doing out there, brother?
Very well, Scott. Very well. That was quite an introduction.
You know, I, we had a good conversation this week, and last session was not my best performance. I had 2 or 3 hours of sleep after a really hard road trip, and I figured if I don't come correct, who am I? We got Dan Kittredge on here. You can't be showing up bush league. You know what I'm saying? Like, man, you got to bring it, man. So today I'm here by myself without Sara. Sara's over at the Food and Farm Conference down in Cedar City, and so you got to come with it. So today's topic, what I wanted to bring to the people is, this concept of failing forward. We are seeing in our consulting work, Sara and I, um, obviously my history is not as long as yours, but it almost feels like a dark day of the soul right now for the organic farmer. We're seeing a lot of people enter the market and move into organic principles, and there's some very legitimate struggles out there. And so we wanted to just provide some sort of value for farmers of all type. Obviously, we're most interested in organic and regenerative practices, but you know, what type of insight or can we provide to farmers to help them make it through this transitional period as we move into a changing climate, as we move into limited resources? Like, my God, it is go time. It is go time right now, and we just want to
Yeah.
try and provide some value. So, um, you know, what we see, and this is what Sarah's been echoing from talking to people down at the Food and Farm Conference, is most farmers seem quite overwhelmed in general, and making any sort of process or procedural change is pretty daunting. And when we talk about modifying their management practices, they just get overwhelmed, which leads to inaction, which leads to failure. Like, where would
Yeah.
you recommend a farmer starts in this process?
Um, for me, it's about understanding how the plants evolve to grow and understanding how nature designed the system to work. And I can certainly tell you that I grew up on an organic farm, and we struggled for decades to make a living, to have enough productivity and all the issues with pest pressure and disease pressure and things like that. It was only when I realized that um, it was about creating a dynamic where the bottom of the food chain is functioning well, and I was able to accomplish that, that I started to get success.
Mhm.
So I mean, you and I both know about the wisdom that's sort of come through the Acres community, and have tapped into that. And I feel like that integrated biological perspective is extremely important, and it does involve a shift of mind, a shift of state of mind. I think we referred to this in one of our earlier
Yes.
conversations about Arden Anderson saying
Mhm.
the biggest block is between the ears,
Yeah.
and if you do the right things with the land, good things happen rapidly. It's
Mhm.
just a question about what are the right things to do with the land, and in many cases, the things we're taught or told are coming from people who are trying to sell us something. Um,
Yeah.
and I always refer to the fact that indigenous communities globally were able to, um, manage continent scale fecundity, vitality, for millennia with no fertilizers, with no machinery, with none of the sprays and all the rest of that stuff. And nature's been doing just fine for hundreds of millions of years with plants. So it's really about humility, and I think, yeah, that's hopefully the conversation we can get into is more of those details.
Yeah, yeah, I hope so. And humility, man, that's a tough one. I was raised to be a very confident individual, and I was raised to know who I am and be as educated as possible. And when we first started having success and we're radically amplifying the results of those that were defined as the best in the business, yeah, yeah, I got a little proud of myself. You know what I mean? Started to get a little too much swagger.
A
Which
little spring in your step there.
little too much spring in my step, which ultimately resulted in a little whoopsh, slap by the
Pride
universe.
cometh before a fall, I
Oh,
think they say. Yeah.
2017 was really rough for me. I mean, by 2017, we had, in the most humble way possible, changed organic cannabis. It was headed to a completely different direction because of the work that we were doing, and I was pretty proud of that. And very quickly got humbled. And now there seems to be a standard trend in my professional consulting where at least once a year I'm caused to question my entire reality. Things that I have determined in my head as concrete factors in all farming processes, and then once a year something will pop up that proves that's not true, and there's not these like universal, all-encompassing, applies everywhere exacting principles, and it's more of a fluid process. Obviously, I think there's, one thing that we probably agree on is there are some obvious basic starting points for matters of soil chemistry, managing farm practices, and things like that. Um, I think one of the things that we probably agree the most on, I'm just guessing, is some of the soil chemistry practices. Neil Kinsey talks about, especially at larger scale agriculture, that there are, kind of general timetables of repairing farms, and I think to a certain extent that has to do with just scale. Like you're not going to bring in 850 trucks of gypsum to correct a 1,000-acre farm in the first year. It's just not
Yeah.
reasonable or practical. But in your travels, literally around the world, talking to farmers and pretty much every type of contextual arrangement that can be imagined, have you seen any sort of kind of standard time frames or how long does it take for this process to convert a farm into truly sustainable and regenerative practices where the farm is thriving, coming from any sort of point of recent failure or moderate success?
I would say a lot of it probably, I mean, are we going to presume that the farmer knows what they're doing?
Yeah, I'd say they're competent at farming in general practice sense, right? Like they understand the principles of the activity they're doing. You know.
I would say if you brought somebody in who, like yourself or a number of other consultants, had the practical know-how to engage any land, um, the results, I would, in my experience, are very rapid when you do the right thing.
Mhm.
I think the major time constraint has to do with how much and how recently the land has been abused. Um, if you've really, really worn it out, if you've been, lots of tillage, lots of chemicals, lots of sprays for the last 20 years, it might take a little while longer to put things back into gear. Oftentimes, there's limiting factors of expense, of just cost and logistic. So um, you might know what all the things are that you should do, but you don't get them all accomplished for one reason or another. Um, I'd like to give the example of my farm when I bought it. It was an old rundown dairy farm, but it hadn't been bothered for 15 years. So nature had been working to sort of get things back in balance, but it hadn't really been actively abused recently. And so, because I was working on a sort of a human scale, half an acre in the backyard, basically to start with, um, I was able to get in all the things that I thought needed to be there, the minerals and the microbes and the air and the water and the food be there, the minerals and the microbes and the air and the water and the food and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, it was definitely like less than 2 months between when I started and the soil was tight and yellow and had no aroma to when it was chocolate cake and full of light crawlers and you could stick your hand into it. So my experience is it can happen extraordinarily rapidly. But I bought my farm after struggling, after growing up on a farm and farming for 20 years, and then spending a number of years like trying to learn, um, and practicing and making mistakes and things like that. So if you want to factor in all that time ahead of
Yeah.
previous, that would be quite some period. Um,
Right.
but yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think I've seen things happen quite rapidly, and I
Yeah.
think, and I know others have as well. If you just put the right pieces in place, and you haven't been abusing things too poorly previously,
Mhm.
um, it's just about all those limiting factors, as far as
Right.
I'm concerned.
Yeah. Which in our consulting work, which is primarily focused, well, it's just kind of the way it worked out. Like my main focus was to work with the top of the top and push them further. Ultimately, what
Hmm.
happened, a large majority of our consulting base is people that are coming off of a major defeat. And in a weird way, it was kind of like we were the last stop on the bus of solutions, and it wasn't necessarily like they jumped in first like let's try Scott and Sarah. It was like, well,
Yeah.
we worked through all these other knuckleheads, let's see if this soil wet stuff means anything, right? And
We got
so
1 year left before we go
yeah,
bankrupt. Let's let's
yeah,
talk to the crazy ones.
yeah, and
What
so
else is there to lose at this point?
straight up, yeah, in my viewpoint that's what went down, and I'm
Yeah,
okay with I'm okay because the advantage that that brought me is, we were overwhelmed with data of what it looks like when things are not going well. And so we had this massive data set of basically the red lines to avoid, varying from not enough deficiencies to toxicities. And we got to navigate from that point up into points of success. And I would say that was probably the best service to my professional career that I could ever imagined.
yeah,
Because most importantly, I'm not afraid of anything. There's nothing that scares me at this point. We have been on the slaughterhouse floor, swept up the drippings, and turned it into gold. And it just, in our personal gardens, we purposely went to work with the problems. We brought in plants with pests and disease and examined them and corrected them. So,
yeah.
we're
I've done the same
me,
thing.
yeah, me personally, I'm not afraid of anything at this point. The farming to me is easy. Managing the farmer's mindset, like you said, the thing between the ears is actually the difficult part of leading farms from one place to another because, in a lot of ways, those bad habits, those principles, those techniques that are maybe causing the detriment had some truth in them that maybe provided some measurable beneficial plant growth response. And then it's then hard to abandon those. And so it's hard to oftentimes take them from where they're at to where they need to go because of, basically not letting go of the past, which now on the flip side of that, if you just leapfrog from one thing to another, that's not a successful path. I'm not advocating abandoning everything you've ever known and jumping to something new because that can be its own problems. Um, but you know, what you mentioned earlier is humility. I think acceptance is a major aspect of that. Like having a legitimate, genuine acceptance of where you're at is essential for moving to the next phase. You know, like
I think, I mean, I'm just thinking of a person who will remain unnamed,
yeah,
who is every year says, "This is the best farm we've ever had," and like looking at the drought and the
yeah,
seeds not germinating and the diseases and the plants. And like, so there's like, you can positive self talk yourself into a lot of places. But then there's also the issue of the gurus and um, I found this person who said this thing, and and they've got the answer, and I believe them, and I'm using their products, and that's why I have the best farm I've ever had.
Right.
And you're like, well, but actually, if you look at the farm, it's not doing that well. But I mean, I remember growing up on a farm, and I didn't actually spend that much time on other people's farms.
Mm.
Um, I didn't spend that much time traveling around and seeing other operations and seeing other ways that things were done. I knew the way we did things. That's the way we always did things. That's the way we always did things, and that was all there was. So it's a being open, being humble. Envisioning the fact that there may be more out there. These are all things that are like systemic human issues that are people don't change in a lot of cases. So I don't
Yeah.
know where to where to push it. I mean, my strategy is sit back and wait for the people who are curious, for
Mm.
the people who actually want to learn and have an open mind, um, rather than try to convince people. I used to try to convince people. I don't think that works. I don't
Right.
think it works.
That's where I started. When I first saw, some of these things that Sarah and I very literally learned at one of your workshops, to put on top of the other things we had in our arsenal. We met you at a very early part of our stage of development, and you sent us on to, literally hundreds of books, and of which we happily consumed and adapted those modalities. But um, I think the first instinct inside us is, man, we got to tell everybody about this. And, we see,
When
I,
you
I
find God, you want to tell people, "I found God.
yeah,
Look,
want to
look."
tell everybody. And what I didn't realize was the farmers have spent so much of their energy and effort beating off snake oil and predatory practices that they weren't all that receptive to, hey, I got this new greatest thing. And once I personally kind of very literally abandoned that strategy altogether and just got the rubber on the road and started getting results. And then we've found fantastic success with farmers that have a close personal experience with somebody that we've positively helped already. So
Right.
it's like internal, what would you call it?
Word of mouth. It's called word of mouth. It's the best form of advertising. 50% of sales comes from word of mouth. All the marketing, all the dollars that are spent, and all the different ways
Mhm,
that are cunning and manipulative,
mhm,
and the old fashioned, somebody you trust tells you something that feels right to you, and
right.
that's what gets through to you, I would say.
Yeah, that is. Yeah. And to a point, I mean, we're not social media and stuff for a long time. We just kind of do the work. And so, what we want to try and do now is resurface a bit and try to bring some value to the broader audience because, again, it is crunch time, man. Whether you're paying attention to the climate or not, whether you're paying attention to the market or not, it's coming. And you really want to, if you're serious about farming and you're serious about agriculture, you need to get into it now. Do not wait. Start working on your education. Obviously tune into the shows that you can. They're providing value, but you got to get into this. You got to get into it yourself. You got to pick up one of these books. Neil Kinsey, Albrecht, Arden Anderson. Any of those are valuable that you'd likely find on Acres. Pretty much anything I think you'd find on Acres, I would say, is quality information. And and you just got to get into it and start now because these things take time. If you're an outside food farmer, you're at the mercy of the natural seasonal changes, and you can't just really practice tomatoes year round unless you're in South Florida or South America or something like that. Here in Utah, I got 2 feet of snow in my backyard. There is no farming going on. And so this time of year, in the depth of winter, we're working on our skills. I'm constantly working on my education, working on the
Yeah.
things that I can do. We can do some experiments with soil and compost and process like that and do some data and analytics. But you really want to get to the meat and potatoes. One thing that I forgot to mention at the beginning for all you following along at the live, we do a question and answer. I forgot to mention that last session. If you are listening live, go ahead and drop your questions for Dan as they come into the comments, and we will address those here live on the show. If you're listening to this show after the live stream, put your comments into the comments section. We'll circle back around and make sure you get answered. The main purpose of this show is to functionally integrate you, the farming community, into this discussion. It's not just Dan and I rambling up here. We have a serious interest in including you honestly to this conversation. If you're on YouTube Live, you got to log in to drop the comments, I think. But anyways, so continuing on with the show here. Some of the other questions I got lined up here is, you know, going back to the farm example that you mentioned of your farm actually being fairly readily correctable. In your journey, you have had maybe one of the most unique experiences and had the chance to sit down with many of these respected elders in the organic farming community, um, like it was your life's mission to absorb and disseminate this information. Are there any specific examples or case studies that you've maybe heard from the Arden Andersons, the Neil Kinseys, the Dan Scows, Charlie Walters, all these people? I guess Albrecht and Reams were passed before you got in, but is there anything that stands out? Because to me, that's what's valuable in our relation. There's lots of valuable, but one of the most valuable things that I get from you is you have direct contact with these people that I've read books about. Like,
Mhm.
um, is there anything that really stands out in your journey, from which we stand on their shoulders that you want to share?
I can't just choose one. I mean, there's so many where to start. And the first thing the person that comes to mind is just actually sitting next to Charles Walters at one of the Acres conferences, where I think it was before the keynote, and he was just sitting there in the front row, and I came down and sat down to talk to him, and we just um, he was genuine and kind and curious and engaged, um, um, and then he got up and did his sort of extemporaneous commentary on the state of the world, and I remember him just speaking so eloquently and so intelligently and so like quoting Ovid or somebody from the Greeks, or I don't remember where it was, but like long multi-paragraph quotations from memory. He was just like so highly intelligent and so compassionate and integrated. And as far as I'm concerned, is the one who is singularly responsible for all those voices coalescing and
Mhm.
starting that work in the early 70s. Certainly an absolute elder. Um, but yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's the organic community, I guess, and then there's the biological community. I would call the Acres community more the biological community because they were not really about organic per se, as far as they were concerned, and the whole Reams community for sure. Um, they're looking at the energy of the thing, and Scow and those guys was ammonium sulfate was great, in at a certain level at a certain time based on what the energy of it was and how it worked in the land and what it caused plants to do was a very
Mhm.
powerful thing. Calcium nitrate, they were absolutely categorically in favor of at certain in certain ways. So um, yeah, I think, I mean, personally, while I am an organic farmer, as in I use practices that would be certifiably organic, as I understand the system, I don't think that you must only use natural materials. I think it's really about what the material is and how it affects the land. That's the thing,
Mhm.
and not the sort of this bifurcation of if it's naturally occurring, it's okay. If it's not naturally occurring, it's
Mhm.
not.
Right.
But
I
boy,
think,
I mean,
yeah, let's unpack that for a second because I don't think people really understand. I think the broader farming community, like we get lumped into chemical or organic standards, and there's this kind of middle ground that's referred to as biological farming, which, to my understanding, is simply farming in a way that's respectable to the biological aspect of the soil organisms, of the plant itself. So sometimes that includes using calcium nitrate, using ammonium nitrate, maybe avoiding the more detrimental things like MAP and DAP or urea. But
mhm,
but understanding, this is what I really got from Dr. Arden Anderson, um, really understanding that sometimes a little bit of organic acid or a little bit of sugar can buffer these chemical compounds, and we can overcome the issue with access to soluble mineral nutrition that comes with dealing with just rocks, right? And organic
yep,
compounds. You're often waiting for those organic inputs to die of old age so the plant that has access to it. And like Arden from what I understand would do like light pulses of calcium nitrate in order to stimulate calcium availability that's in the soil. And using these tools to, which I personally haven't really got into, but like steering the cationic or anionic balance and initiating fruit and flower set and changing from vegetative to generative stages and literally driving the plant with mineral nutrition,
Yeah.
while also not being destructive, right? And, you know, I buy organic food as often as I can to support that community. But if a farmer comes to me and says, should I get organically certified? My first response is no, and actually, no. I'll help you do that if that's what you want. But, I think, like the Ardens and Kerry Reams were really onto something. It's like, look, we can avoid all this bureaucracy. We can avoid the, you know, punitive aspects of organic agriculture. We can produce extremely high quality nutrient dense crop, and we can use the best of both worlds. And
And
I'm
that, I mean, and Kerry Reams was the one who brought forth the refractometer.
right.
If you want to talk about where did the concept of measuring quality in food come from,
Mhm.
it was from Kerry Reams, who was a clairvoyant, and he didn't care whether something was organic or not. He cared how it affected the biological system. And
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, for me, I think there's a lot of people who get a little bit uppity about themselves and their community. I like to say it's like a religiosity. We're Methodists, you're Presbyterians. We must be obviously better than you.
Mhm.
We're organic, you're regenerative. We must be better than you. We're permaculturalists. We're whatever. I mean, and this is where I've been focusing my work is it's really about the result. It's about the quality of the food and the Brix refractometer as like an impartial arbiter, like, um, until we've got the sophisticated bionutrient meter or any other kind of nutrient density testing device, the refractometer still works extremely well.
Mhm.
It's really true. And if people are just even a tiny little bit open to the possibility of humility, I say get a refractometer, and when
Mhm.
no one's looking, go out into your field and squish a couple leaves and check the Brix. And if the Brix is 4 or 5 or 6, a lot better is possible. And that
Yeah.
connects with your economic viability.
Mhm.
Um, and you don't have to send everything off to a lab. It doesn't have to cost you any money, but if you're open to that, and then that also would be a way for people to discern whether or not a product is working for them.
Yeah.
If you think you've got God's greatest gift as far as a consultant or a product line or a technique or a material, um, and you're just running on the trust you have in that person, I would say one intelligent thing to do might be to talk to the plant and
Yeah.
see what it has to say. And until you get to the point where you can directly talk to your plant, which is really where we should all be going,
Mhm.
and asking the plant, not asking the salesman, you can use a refractometer to talk to you and to help talk to the plant and see where it's at.
Mhm.
And I mean, we just have to have some kind of a truth mechanism, um, to sort of, because there's a lot of content out there, because there's a lot of stories and a lot of products and a lot of egos and isms and communities. And I'm part of the soil food web community,
Yeah.
we're the best. I'm like,
Mhm.
let's check the Brix of the plants. Like, let's can we have that conversation? Can we get to the point where people are willing to say, like, I think I'm doing good, and I'm going to check and see, and then, oh my god, I'm not as good as I thought I was, and maybe I'll experiment with 3 other products in or techniques in my field this year, because what I'm doing is only getting me to a Brix of 6. I think that would be a good way to frame it, if we can get people to sort of have that concept.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, man.
anyway.
And based on my personal experience working very intimately with farmers, I would assert that the only farmers that will continue to farm into the future are those that are honest with themselves, those that are able to meet this situation with humility and look at the honesty of what's going on and truly guide their farm uh, with reality. And one of the things that really gets my blood boiled, because I come from Southern California. My family was in large scale agriculture. I was raised simultaneously in a melon field, talking to the farmers, and then living in the suburbs. Some of my friends went on to be some of literally the most influential cannabis farms on the planet. And that just happened to be, I was right place, right attitude, right effort. And in the suburbs, I was one of the few people with farming experience. So I was brought into these communities because I was the only person that I knew that had had conversations about fertilization. Like I had
Yeah.
sit in the office with my uncle, talk to farmers that were managing 1,000 acres or more about what it takes to fill a fruit, right? And so like I knew nothing, but when you take dudes from the suburbs that are trying to learn how to farm, I had a little bit of information. And so I was welcome into these communities. And ultimately, like I said, some of my hydroponic mentors, back in the, late 2000s and whatnot, we were building automated systems that grew the plants when we were at work. And so I came from this extremely technical hydroponic background that the most important thing was being good. There was no conversations of guru. If you started a conversation with I read on the internet, you might get a wrench thrown at you. Like that was not tolerated at all. You might get out over some stuff like that. And so that was the environment I came from. And in the food agriculture, when you're growing 1,000 acres of crops, you can't be half-assed. You must be good at that process. And so,
Yeah.
two really interesting worlds that raised me, it was essential to be an expert, be good at your job. And then when I was inspired to transition to organic systems and found Dr. Elaine and started finding the truth in that method, um, started moving into this organic community. And like I said, in hydroponics, at least in the cannabis world, it's more important to be good. It's more important to be good at your job. In the organic community, especially in cannabis, it's more important to not rock the boat, to not be disruptive, to not counteract the gurus, to not disrespect the gurus. And it's more important to be part of the kumbaya vibe than it is to actually be good at your craft. And now that, from my observation, the organic living soil world is really coming into age in this social media influencer world. And there's some just horrible, horrible, horrible information out there. And I don't, to me, that feels new. You have a much longer history that maybe go in cycles. I don't know. But, you know, we are seeing in our cannabis work very rapidly that the people that have been growing organically for a long time that are not willing to move, that are not willing to be honest with the situation, are being replaced by hydroponic farmers that are learning organic techniques and they're bringing those principles into organics, focusing on the success of their project, being honest with the reality of what it is. And I'm seeing every day hydroponic farmers move into the organic cannabis space and replace organic farmers. And that's never been my goal. My goal is to keep the people that have been doing this in it and make them as good as possible. But because they're unwilling to move and because they're unwilling to adapt to the changing world, they're being replaced with people that are. And that's a crazy, crazy thing to me. Um,
That's
uh,
just like what's going on in the, politics in the world right now with the US and the West, being subsumed by the global, by the rest.
yeah,
We've overplayed our hand. We've been dogmatic. We've been closed-minded. We haven't been, um, present and building culture and having resiliency um, and we're failing. And other people have been working hard and learning and studying and actually doing the work and they're stepping up. And yeah, it happens. It
mhm,
happens. It happens everywhere. We have to. I mean, life is the process of life is a process of evolution. I think. I think it's pretty hard to find a spot and a thing and then just do it for 40 years.
right.
Like in my experience of life, like you have to keep growing. You have to keep, being present with what's going on and have that sort of that iterative conversation with reality. So,
Mhm,
um, yeah, I mean, when I was a kid, organic was an absolute radicals space. And um, the people who were checking out, right? They were the back to the landers and you would call them what people, what do they call them when you get those shipping containers
yeah, yeah.
and your
No, yeah.
prepper, right? I mean, they're basically the preppers
Yeah.
Like the history of the organic movement is they
Mhm.
were the preppers of the 60s and 70s who were like, this ain't working. We're gonna go unplug
Yeah.
and uh, and now it's orthodoxy. Now it's like commercial. It's big. It's multi-billion-dollar. It's corporate. It's scale, and it's not so much about the word organic. It's about the state of mind of the
Yeah.
people,
Right.
and I think that's always the issue is your state of mind.
Mhm.
I've just been looking at that in the BFA as far as our our staff and our board, and like, oh,
Mhm.
there's some people that are come from that sort of organic culture, and some people come from more of like the conventional culture. There's actually a different state of mind, and you can. It was just interesting for me to come to that realization recently.
Yeah.
Like, yeah,
Yeah.
so
We got a question. We got a question from the audience that I want to bring up now because it kind of ties in with what you're saying. So Lisa Stokey is saying or asking, what did the Bionutrient Institute discover about the variation in organically certified producers? And I think this has to do with the data you found with the meter, which we kind of talked about last time. But this is
the data we collected as we were working to calibrate the meter.
yeah,
Yeah. um, that organic is no better than anything else. That most things, I mean, I think we looked at about 25 different crops, um, roots and leaves and fruits and grains, like a bunch of different types of food, and we got samples from all over the place, from all over the US and Europe, and small farms and big farms and organic farms and not organic farms and grocery stores and farm stands and farmers markets, and just by looking at top to bottom, depending on what your nutrient is, if it's copper or calcium or potassium or polyphenols or antioxidants, um, from the lowest to the highest, maybe is a 4x variation or an 8x variation or a 20x variation. So 4 times as much or 8 times as much or 20 times as much. Like this one has 20 times as much as that one of this compound, or 8 times
mm,
as much as that one. And um, if there, let's say there were 200 carrots, there might have been five that were in the top 20th percentile of what's possible, and maybe 10 between the 60th and the 80th percentile. So 15 out of 200 were above were above 60, from 60 to
yeah,
100. So like if you had 200 people in a college class
yeah,
and 15 of them got up 60 or above, that would mean that 185 failed.
yeah,
And so that's like foundationally where we were at, was like the nature of the supply chain was almost everything was at the low end of what's possible. And organic showed up just like everything else. Organic
yeah,
did not show up as superior in any way from a
yeah,
nutritional standpoint. So to the broader point, I think
yeah.
it's not about the label, it's about the actual soil health.
Right.
Um, anyway,
And
yeah.
no, it's that's what people need to hear, man. That's what people need to hear because um man, my uncle's a produce broker. From the youngest I can remember, we were taught to grade produce. Every time he would represent a farmer at the start of a new season, he would fly, drive, sometimes two, three times in a season. We'd get in the field, like Arden says, get your boots dirty. We would grab the fruit, we would cut it open, then we'd go talk to the farmer. And it's like my uncle needed to know how far that produce could travel. Some of it went to Japan, some of it stayed in Southern California, and it needed, I saw very clearly that quality was a direct association to shelf life, basically. And so every time I go to buy produce, I start at the organic. I look for quality indicators, bruising, coloration, all just general quality. And I try to support the organic farmers, and then I go pick the best of the conventional. Um, and we really need to, well, I think part of it is the limitations that are set on organically certified farmers. That's why I like the biological mindset, is you're not bound by all these punitive parameters. Like they just recently worked through all the cannabis organic certifications for California. It's called OCal. And we're working with the first farm to be certified in that. And, there's 12 pages of what you can do, 94 pages of how they're going to fine you and what you can't do. And it's extremely punitive and it's extremely refining. And organic agriculture, you're relegated to oxide forms of trace minerals, which means oxidized and not available. It's like, how many pest and disease problems are directly associated to an imbalance or lack of trace minerals? And the only products you're allowed to add in
You
there
can't
are,
use sulfates. You can't use copper sulfate.
well, I mean,
Manganese sulfate, stuff like that.
yes, you can, I believe. To be honest, I'm not an expert in organic agriculture. They all think I'm nuts. We've worked with a
Yeah.
couple nuts. We start talking about managing biology and high performance strategies, and they go, "Oh, you're just a weed grower," and they dismiss me. So we don't honestly have a lot of, I've briefed foreign governments on organic cannabis, but your average organic farmer thinks I'm an idiot, but that's another conversation. So I honestly don't have a lot of experience. I've read the manuals, and we had to do about a year's worth of work to not modify, but work with the organic certifiers for cannabis to put it into parameter of what's reasonable. Like it was
Mhm.
nonsense. It took about a year, and we got the first indoor cannabis farm doing that, doing great things. But um, the conversation around sustainable and regenerative is healthier plants, which your data thus far is not showing that that's magic, and we got a lot of work to do. And so a lot of people in the organic regenerative community likes to talk about ridding pests and disease from crops when these management practices are modified towards regenerative principles. But most farmers actually never even see this in person. We see it all the time in our work because we understand those principles that drive that. But do you have any personal experience with seeing, you know, pretty solid changes in pest and disease pressure when the regenerative and organic practices are properly applied?
Again, I think it's the biological practices.
Hmm.
In my experience, I think the regenerative community is not talking too much about mineral balancing. They don't. I don't think the regenerative community has come across Albrecht particularly,
Right.
and I think a lot of the organic community as well is still unaware of Albrecht. Um, I think, I mean, certainly that was what shifted my reality was when I started to put some of the minerals into the ground, and saw my potatoes didn't have potato bugs. They got killed by the frost. My, cucumbers didn't have powdery mildew. They got killed by the frost. That blew my mind. That
Yeah.
blew my mind. I'd never seen anything like that in my entire life of being an organic farmer. I'd never seen those kinds of plants not get attacked by those classic pests and diseases that they get hit by every single year.
Hmm.
And it was only when the frost came that they died, and we didn't have to keep planting successions of cucumbers and stuff like that. So certainly I have had that experience personally. I've been teaching courses around the world, as you mentioned earlier, definitely around the US, about how to do this. And I've got so many people who have taken my courses who are like, oh my God. I always said, don't take my word for anything. Who am I? I'm just one more guy up there. I may not
Yeah.
be trying to sell you anything, but you still shouldn't trust me. What
Hmm.
you should do is you should experiment. If any of the things I'm talking about make sense, then I would say apply them in a section of your field.
Yeah.
And if it works, you'll see it. If it's true, you'll see it because, you know, a healthy plant behaves in an entirely different fashion from a not healthy plant. And
Yeah.
the reality is, most of us are used to seeing unhealthy plants. And we never really properly have seen healthy plants. So we don't, it's all these other aspects of spacing and timing and things like that where, um, because we are just like our minds can't envision what's possible, we create a structure that ensures that doesn't happen. So
Yeah.
it's a mind frame, but I would say I would say the mineral balancing piece is one. I mean, that's I've been known for various things over my career, if we could call it a career now. It's been almost 15 years of me doing this kind of thing, and
Yeah.
right at the beginning, it was minerals. There was no meter. There was no the Bionutrient Food Association didn't exist. I was the guy who was always talking about minerals. That
Yeah.
was that was the thing that I was most passionate about because it like wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, some
So
of these.
that's one piece to start with is just like
Yeah.
that level of of
Yeah.
of insight that like the biological community takes the wisdom from the conventional ag, wisdom from organic ag, wisdom from permaculture, wisdom from
Mhm.
biodynamics, agroecology. There's a lot of really good communities of insight and wisdom out there, and I feel like the regenerative community is, has got a lot of good talking points, and intention is there, but they haven't really dialed it in from an agronomic standpoint
I
anywhere
would,
near as well as the biological community has.
I
And certainly
would,
the organic community is in the same space.
yeah. Some of the things you say make me so excited. It's hard to control the impulse of shouting out, and so I don't,
You can say it. You can give me an
yeah,
amen if you want every now and then.
you know, it causes these eruptions. Yeah, it
I
does,
see you
man.
twitching
I,
over there. I'm not quite sure
man,
what's going
yeah.
on.
Part of it's that I got hit by a semi truck and I'm struggling with impulse control, but part of excitement. Um, yeah, man, it like we've in our work, we've provided data and analytics for a lot of these gurus, and you go to their farm and it's a complete shit show. And it's like, I'm trying to limit the rants in this episode, but like, can we get these people to be honest for 1 minute? And can we allow people a platform that are being honest? We're given a platform in the
I
organic
think
community.
I think the way you change it is you got to get the consumers to choose the better food.
Yeah,
That's the thing. Until like there's a data point which is saying you're not as good,
yeah,
until the market's telling them that, until their stuff is being left and not chosen because they're not as good. I, I,
yes,
I mean, I don't think there's any other way to change people's minds who to think they're right
I
than
agree.
with like visceral brass tacks. Like your stuff isn't as good as the other people's stuff. Like
I
that.
agree.
I mean, yeah.
No,
Anyway,
I'm with you, and that's the
part of my
beauty.
strategy.
Yeah, no, I'm with you, and that's when we caught that workshop back in 2017 or whatever it is, and you talked about the vision of the bionutrient meter and what it would accomplish of actually driving change. That really sparked something in us because we were already knee deep in the highest levels of commercial cannabis at that point, and we immediately, not that it wasn't our focus to produce high quality, but like I saw the path. I saw the path that in order to make radical change was to show these data sets of actual quality. And the benefit of cannabis is in order to sell your product on a legal market, it must be tested for 68 pesticides, 4 human pathogens, 5 heavy metals, and potency, full basically quality metrics, and then that's available to the consumer. You can talk all you want about how good you are, but if you're not moving those numbers,
Yeah,
and what is moving the market, unfortunately, I think it's they're focusing on the wrong metric and they're focusing on THC percentages only. But most states have gone to, basically from left to right in the cabinet, the lowest THC to the highest THC, and the farmer goes, where is the best? And in their mind, I don't think that's the best, but you're already seeing it drive markets, and that is what in the cannabis industry is creating a radical shift from chemical agriculture to regenerative living soil systems because we're able to produce numbers that nobody else can produce.
because
And
those
that,
secondary metabolites are only produced in high levels when the biological system is functioning well. You can't
exactly.
get those compounds. I
Mhm.
mean, it's the microbes that are critical for those compounds to be built in significant levels.
Exactly.
It's just foundational principles.
Which is what your meter does for food. But what Lisa's saying in here, and one of the comments is saying is like, man, we need this on the label. Like we need the data from your tool on the label of the produce because that has changed cannabis in 3.5 years. You know what I mean? Like it did not take long to radically shift a worldwide market. And
But the
man,
question is, what is the data? I mean,
right,
what is quality? This is
right,
the systemic issue that we're struggling with right now. Is
right,
we know that nutrients vary dramatically. We know that polyphenols vary 21, 40 to 1, calcium, potassium. We know all those things vary, but
yeah,
just because you have more potassium doesn't mean it's more nutritious. How about the zinc level? How about the copper level? How do you average it all together? How do you come to a one uniform, this crop
right,
is 80 out of 100?
right,
Um, that's an expensive project. And cannabis is one crop. And how many millions of dollars did they spend to develop the framework for testing that one crop? Who's
yeah,
spending $1 million on cucumbers or
no,
$1 million on tomatoes
right,
to develop the framework? We don't have the framework
right.
to be able to do the testing to make the claims right now from a more comprehensive perspective. And that's the issue: is we prioritize our drugs and not our food.
Right.
Um, and
Yeah. Like we wanted this effect in food. We just found a niche in cannabis and we're good at it. And I feel like to a certain degree, I had to wait till food farmers were ready for the level of. I know that sounds like an egotistical statement, but like we're doing some extremely advanced stuff here in the cannabis space. Sorry, I just fat fingered my thing and my thing disappeared. There we go. Um, get all fired up.
Something
But
happened for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I got
So,
distracted.
yeah, so Jonathan Lane is dropping in, which moves us to our next subject of soil fertility. Jonathan Lane is asking, can we talk about exchange capacity and does it affect the frequency of fertilization for high value crops? Which is a really interesting question.
Mm,
Uh,
yeah.
kind of the question, that's the concept we're moving to. And kind of the question I have is, what you touched on a slight bit earlier was, the Albrecht system really does challenge most of the standard procedures that have shaped soil management coming from the university systems, which is mostly focused on solubility and chemical
Yeah.
treatments.
Right.
What do you think is the most important factor that changes people from an NPK mindset into one that is actually dealing with the management of soil chemistry, soil minerals, focuses on real balance, which the net effect then becomes health, like you said. Like how do we get people to make that shift? Because I see a lot of organic people still have an NPK mindset, and that doesn't really pan out. You know what I mean? Like, you have to, you know,
I don't think we get people to make shifts. I think nature, life gets you to make shifts, and I think some people are hardwired to a certain level of or way of thinking. I mean, it is effectively. I think of it as the reductionist mindset. You can call it the colonized mindset,
yeah,
versus the indigenous mindset. And as long as you are coming from that colonized, reductionist, mechanistic, you know, all of realities in the physical plane kind of set of assumptions, you're missing you're missing the point. And so it really, I think, to some decent degree, comes down to a philosophical standpoint, and like where are you at in your understanding of life and God and consciousness and all those kinds of things.
mhm,
So uh, yeah, I mean I'd like to answer Jonathan's question as well, but
yeah,
I think that's an answer to yours. I don't
yeah,
School of Hard Knocks will
yeah,
hopefully get people to, and being surrounded by people who are open minded. But some people are just, that's where they're at in their head, and they aren't going to change. The change happens when they die. That's the next person comes in. So
yeah.
maybe I'm a little bit more cynical now than I
No,
used to
you're
be when
good.
I was
Dude,
35.
I go through those
Um,
moments as well. I do as well.
but on the point of CEC,
Yeah,
and fertilizing, I mean, what is CEC? Cation exchange capacity. The metaphor I use is effectively how big is the gas tank in your soil. Like
mhm,
if you've got a motorcycle, it might have a 1 gallon gas tank. If you've got a F-350, it might have a 20 gallon gas tank.
mhm,
Um, you can put you put 10 gallons into a motorcycle gas tank, and 9 gallons are going to end up on the ground.
right,
So, so for me, the CEC is like, it tells you what's the holding capacity of your soil. Effectively how many nutrients can it hold to produce what scale of crop. Um, I I would say the objective is more to increase the exchange capacity, which in many cases involves increasing the organic matter, which involves facilitating healthy soil function. I'm
mhm,
not a big fan of regular fertilization. I mean, I understand the value to it, but
mhm,
in my experience, like if you set up a system for the plants to be doing what they have naturally designed to be doing, all these regular inputs should be not necessary.
right.
So um, I'm not sure. I don't remember the exact question he asked, but
Yeah, he was
may have
just
addressed it.
asking, I think we're covering in essence, and one of the things that I'm hearing you saying is, you're not a big advocate of regular fertilization, and what we see in our work, I do incorporate that for the context of our work for different reasons, but I think the reason you're hesitant to it is what we see in our work is when too much of a focus is on fertilization, you're kind of subverting these natural communication systems between the plant and the soil, soil organisms, and you basically make a lazy plant. It's like a subsidized child in college doesn't come out as hot and ready as somebody who was kicked out on their ass at 18, and from that standpoint, yes. Now we have moderated our fertilization strategy in order to supplement properly that and not take it over. And so we're doing very small, very strategic
Well,
amounts,
there's
you know.
supplementing versus fertilizing is a
Right.
big difference there, right?
Mm,
So, I mean, fertilizer, maybe I'm just somebody who's too far down the rabbit hole, but fertilizer by definition means soluble nutrients in solution.
sure.
And so, if you're, and that usually is, oh, my plant needs more nitrogen, I'm going to give it more nitrogen,
Yeah.
as opposed to supplementing, which might be the nitrogen fixation pathway is broken. Maybe it needs some more molybdenum to establish nitrogenase enzymes to facilitate that nitrogen fixation process.
Yes.
Um, so I think, I mean, I do when I'm teaching courses and things like that, recommend, a regular supplementation protocol of like, here's some goodies that can be put
Mhm.
into the ecosystem, into the mix, so you don't ever experience limiting factors.
Right.
But I foundationally on my farm, what I try to do is set things up so that when the plants are in the ground, they've got everything that they need, and my next job after putting them in is to harvest. And um, you know, if you look how nature does it, I mean, I guess it's a question of level of intensity and how dialed in you want to be and how much you want to try to be maximizing yield. But um, I like nature's model of a gentle touch and
Mhm.
not a lot of engagement.
Right.
But I
Right.
guess we've all got our different philosophies.
Well, and I think what's important, so I think the important distinction between your world, like you were raised, you've got an entire life of evolution of organic agriculture. So when you moved to your farm that had been fallow for 15 years, you had a big knowledge base of things that had worked, things that hadn't worked, and where to go from there. And so, you're likely operating from a much more stabilized position of success than most of these newcomers or people that are failing from bad YouTuber advice. And so, I think it is important to, when you're in the transitory phase and you're moving either from a chemical bombarded soy to an organic, and you and I have seen this inside the industry where farmers make a radical leap. They don't necessarily put all the components in to support that transition, and they go out of business, whether that's through mineral strategies or biological strategies. And so there is an important aspect of supporting that soil as soil chemistry comes into line, supporting that plant until you get that system moving and
Yep, yep.
that soil healthy again. You get, there's a bit of, ether that needs to be sprayed in the old farm truck. Oh,
Get the old
and
carburetors.
so there's,
I
I think,
mean,
like, you know,
certainly, but if you aren't focusing on the foundational components, you're always going to be, playing around with different crutches and
mhm,
trying this one and trying that one and really kind of just sort of spitting in the wind.
yeah,
Um, I think for me, the foundational dynamics of there must be sufficient moisture in the soil at all points in time. There must be sufficient minerals in the soil at all points in time. There must be sufficient air in the soil at all points in time. There must be sufficient food for the microbes at all points in time. You must have a sufficient spectrum of microbes. Like if you don't have water in the soil, foliar sprays aren't going to do much.
right,
And a lot of people are like, I foliar spray religiously every week. And I'm like, yeah, and that's nice, but you understand that it's a biological system, and because it hasn't rained for a month, it's the lack of water in the soil is your foundational issue. I feel like we have to start with the foundational dynamics, and if you jump to products and you jump to inputs and you don't have that foundational piece in place, you're never going to get to where you need to go. And if you do have the foundational piece in place, you'll realize that you don't actually need many of these products at all. So I would say like we got to take it down to the lower level of foundational environmental conditions, um, and it's not as sexy as the newest foliar spray or product in the market. Um, And
Yeah.
there are some great products in the market. There are some really, really powerful products in the market that are really that yeah, 100%. All kinds of stuff with micronization and, I mean, you know, microbes pre-digesting stuff and structured stuff, all kinds of cool things out there. But um,
Well,
yeah,
I think it comes back to one of the things you said. I want to circle back to it is, and it kind of works in these two human patterns that I see working with farmers. Is one, most farmers have no concept of what's possible, therefore they don't chase it. Sarah refers to it as the 4 minute mile. Nobody tried to run a 4 minute mile, said it wasn't possible. One guy did it. 9 days later, the second guy did it, or something like that. And it's like, oh, and that's what we're seeing in cannabis, where these markers are set out there publicly. If somebody hits 40% total cannabinoids, which is basically a unicorn, if you hit a unicorn, damn straight that's going on social media that afternoon, right? And
right,
so
yeah,
people are given these 4 minute miles, and that is lacking in food production, in my opinion. We need to set that, and so it's this combination of not having an inherent desire to see what's possible. I was groomed for that. I come from the era of youth sports where we were sent to specialists at 11 years old, and we were given the stats of our performance. Like, hey, you went 0 for 3. If you want to play next week, get your shit together. And it was like ingrained. If you do not perform and these data don't move, you're going to get sent home on Sunday after the tournament's over. And you're not part of this team. Like,
yeah,
selection is a daily process for us. And I love that environment. And I love working with farmers that think that way. I want to work with the special operations people. I want to work with the people that want to see what's possible. And so you get this combination of not having an internal drive to surpass your neighbors. And then as you go on that path, you're subverted by the new fishing lure shiny bullshit that's likely actually antimicrobial and killing soil life and destroying soil structure, but it's sold as a surfactant. Like, that's a new popular trend in cannabis. They're using all these wacky additives that are supposed to be like soil wetters, and they literally are some of the most antimicrobial compounds you can put in the soil. It's mind blowing, but
yeah.
everybody's using it, and it literally, we've seen farmers incorporate this particular product, and they're like, man, 3 weeks later, my soil was actually destroyed. And then in that moment, being honest with where it's going, and I personally see most organic farmers not wanting to be the only person not having success with this new fad, and then they just keep driving off a cliff with it. And you have to have you have to have those checks and balances. Like, you're a very intuitively guided farmer. Sarah and I are very intuitively guided, but we use data to communicate that intuition, because most people aren't receptive to, hey, I downloaded from the universe that you need more sulfur. You know what I mean? And it's like, they think you're nuts. But if you can show them a soil test that shows 12 parts per million of sulfur, they're likely to,
It's amazing. You say, the target is 75 and
yeah.
your number is 12. They're like, oh, I need more sulfur. And like, all you did was say the target was 75. And like, why should they believe you? Except that you gave them a number and we're like trained to
Mhm.
just like get in line. And it's amazing.
Yeah, yeah.
It's,
Well, I will. Not all farmers are receptive to that. We work with the farmers that are receptive to that, right?
I've had
So,
a lot of experiences with people, where, I mean, I just watched, I watched, you present a topic, you can present, as soon as you get into like, this is the math and this is the target, and like, and you give people like a little box to like fill in, and they're just like, they just get right into it without even, it's like we're well trained. We're well trained. So I think it's valuable, for those who are curious and wanting
mm,
um, yeah. Um,
yeah. Well, one of the things that I see as a goal with regards to soil chemistry in particular, well, all things, but um, with the topic at hand of soil chemistry, I do a little over 1,000 mineral recommendations a year, and have for almost 10, 5, 6, 7 years. And of that sample set, there's been 3 farmers ever that were managing their soil chemistry intuitively without soil testing. And when we did those first baselines, we're pretty damn close.
mhm.
One was an organic cultivator from Northern California. We never talked about what his method was. He never revealed it to me, but his knowing of what needed to be done with soil chemistry was stronger than my data set. And he got everything right except sulfur, which was interesting. And number two is actually Sarah's sister, Jenny. Got second closest to Albrecht balanced without any prior soil chemistry. And I was racking my brain trying to figure out who the third was. I can't remember who it was. It'll probably come to me. But nonetheless, the important part is with regards to managing farm practices, the organic people want to, be led by the wind, and it's like a trophy of honor to be able to read the plant. But the data would show almost nobody is accomplishing that, personally, which I would like to see. Obviously, we need to be able to, like you said, the original indigenous people were not sending soil samples into Logan, and they were just managing these practices through intuition. I'm guessing, and being truly connected to that land, which we need to get back to. And my personal strategy for that is data that's intended to realign the farmer's intuition with what's going on. That's kind of one of our personal practices. One of the things that you mentioned earlier that I want to circle back to was foliar feeding, and there seems to be, when people take action towards a full fertility strategy, and not just a little bit of fish here, but like are trying to strategically target trace minerals, major and minor elements, they seem to get hyper focused on foliar feeding. Whereas in our work, we take accounting of these things. So some of the math that I do for our clients is we take the quantity of minerals in the soil, we translate that to grams of element per acre, because a part per million is not a part per million is not a part per million. It has to do with the weight of the soil, right? So the heavier the soil, the more part per million, the more minerals, right? And then if you take fertilization and you compare that to that contribution, does not even come close. So
Hmm.
fertilization, fairly proactive in our work, is not even 10% of the mineral nutrition contributed to the plant through soil chemistry matters. If you take foliar fertilization, man, I'll have to do the math. I didn't have time to do it today, but I could give you good hard numbers. But I'd say foliar nutrition is contributing maybe 10% of the grams of element to the productive process that fertilization is, which fertilization is less than 10% of soil chemistry. So we're talking like a literal drop in the bucket of nutrition contributed to the process through foliar feeding. Like, why are people so hyper focused on foliar nutrition and think that can, that can circumvent these basic foundational principles I think you and I agree on that need to be there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the best scientific answer, I mean, there's all kinds of answers. There's the, who are you following, and what are all the cool people doing, and what's the ism of the decade or whatever.
Mhm.
And certainly the tissue tests and the foliar thing seems to be what all the cool kids are doing right now.
Right.
So a lot of people are just jumping on the bandwagon, I think. As I understand the sort of the rationale, you know, there's leaves are green to a greater and lesser degree. Some leaves are full of chloroplasts. Some leaves have only 30% of the chloroplasts they could have, and the there are some critical limiting factors that in like of cobalt or whatever it is, magnesium, that are limiting the amount of chloroplasts a plant can actually have in their leaf.
Mm.
And so if you apply a foliar spray that has those things the plant doesn't have in its leaf, that allows it to build more chloroplasts and it can go through photosynthesis to a greater degree, that will make more sugar, which will then be injected down into the soil, which will feed more soil life, which will facilitate greater nutrient availability because that cycle is functioning more
Mhm.
well. So I think I mean, to me, that's a good logical argument for why you should be, um, for when and how foliar sprays could be appropriate.
Right.
And certainly you can get more rapid uptake of the
Mm.
plant, uptake of nutrients into the plant. I think if you're trying to give the plant everything it needs through foliar sprays, that's a totally flawed strategy. But if you're understanding it as a part of this system, and like we were talking about before with Arden Anderson, sort of
Mhm.
kicking the, stimulating the system with some calcium nitrate, getting the wheels turning. Like, you need calcium early in the spring, and if the soil's
Right.
cold and the biological system's not functioning very well, calcium limitation is going to be inhibiting all kinds of other things happening. So,
Right.
putting down 5 or 10 pounds per the acre, it's really not that much, and if it will can facilitate things occurring that were otherwise being inhibited. So yeah, but I mean, I know, Elaine Ingham talks about how all the minerals are there, and various people can make those arguments. I just have seen so many times over and over again that when people do an Albrecht mineral balancing of their soil, that things just work really well.
Yeah.
It's just like you get lots big yields of healthy plants, and it's just like, I don't know. I mean, Albrecht, he was a good hard scientist, and I think he figured something out there, and it really obviates the need for a lot of agrochemicals, which is why I think he got taken out of the land grant system in the whatever it was 50s when he did get taken out. But and all of his students and grad students and proteges as well.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I mean, there's his missing pieces, and then the other thing is basically, there's not a lot of money to be made in selling limestone.
Right.
Um, and there was a lot more money to be made in selling foliar sprays. And so we got to always question the agenda of where the story is coming from. There may be truth in the story, but I mean, I always tell the story about rock dust and sea salt. I'm like, the continents are made out of rock and the oceans are made out of seawater. And between rock dust and seawater, we got a bunch of good minerals. And like,
Yeah.
you're never going to corner the market on them. You're never going to be able to like make a 3x return or a 10x return on basalt because there's just too much damn basalt in the world.
Yeah.
and so and so if you want to get investors and you want to get a big company and you want to go to scale and you want to make a lot of profit and all that kind of thing, a lot of these really natural, simple things that are fairly readily available, not that expensive, you can't make a lot of money on them. The story doesn't get told about them as much,
Yeah.
and it's because of that, as far as I'm concerned, um, lack of capacity for profit, um, which is why those stories are not being more well told. And I think I can, yeah, not name names again, but speak to
Yeah.
that with from experience.
Yeah. The thing that really bummed me out when I got like behind the curtain of the Wizard of Oz, so to speak, in the industry, it was like, man, like there's this fork in this road. Like, you don't necessarily choose a life of poverty, but it's definitely not the best financially for my business if I teach you how to very economically be extremely successful and then ultimately not need me. And Sarah and I have committed to that path. We have committed to farmer empowerment. We have committed to making sure that the farmer wins in this situation. And along the way, I mean, we probably definitely could have made more money along the way, but I'm doing this to make an impact. I'm doing this to allow humans a shot at surviving the future, right? And we are taken care of. We're fine. It's not like we're homeless or nothing. But, it seems that all of the people, I mean, I should be careful with the word all, but it
You
seems
should
like
always be careful with the word all.
all, but, it definitely seems that the prior eras to what I'm engaging in right now is they get to some truth and then they ultimately go, well, I guess I'll play this game a little bit. And then it starts to bring ego into it and it starts to bring like mine's better than yours and it's created a lot of problems for farmers and in that context the farmer's the loser, man. And I've seen several people in the cannabis space start out at as altruistic sharers of information and then take a shift to literally changing their information so that the farmer starts failing so that they buy their products and it becomes this chemical addiction model and we're not here to talk about any of those people but we have to there has to be a shift. There has to be a shift where the farmer can see through these things. I lean on the data because then you can show for yourself. You don't got to dream about it. You got to take somebody's word for it. Do a soil test, do a water test, do a biological assessment, and we'll talk about that data and move you to where you need to be. And Man, it is crunch time. I said it over and over. Sarah always reminds me to keep it light. But man, if you've not been paying, like, it is go time. You know what I mean? It is time. It is time to, you know,
And it's incumbent on all of us to, take our power. And I mean, we've been trained to, you know, repeat after the teacher, and defer to the teacher, and defer to the priest, or the boss, and not to be independent, not to be free thinking, not to be, you know, um, standing in our own empowerment. And I think, a bit people are charismatic and they've got followings, and you want to be part of the in group, and there's that whole tribal nature,
yeah,
and the algorithm is going to be sending you the thing that more people are watching, rather than the thing that less people are watching. And um, yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine yesterday who has she does a like a permaculture sort of design company. And I mean, she's like douses, and talks to the nature spirits, and sees
mhm,
if there's any disturbed energies, and like she's like the most righteous person you'd ever want to have, like walking your land, and again coming up with guidance. And she started her company, I'm not sure what it was, 10 or 15 years ago. And she was just talking about these other guys that are in her community who have started a company that they basically create a spreadsheet and like a little algorithm, and said, just give us the data points, and we'll spit out a recommendation for you. And they took that, and it went to scale, and
yeah,
they've got lots of money, and they're affecting large amounts of land, and people know them, and they're sitting back in their jacuzzis or whatever.
mhm,
um, and they are helping to affect more acreage than she is, but she's affecting it in a more
yeah,
holistic way. um, I don't know. I mean, there's just these levels of things, and people are at where they're at, and we're all learning together. For me, like I said, going back to the market, I think if we can get to a point where the market is saying, we want this because it's better, and we don't want that because it's not as good from a
right,
nutritional standpoint. I think that's going to be what drives the conversation to results, because it's the actual job of growing food, which is what you get paid for. And
yeah,
so there's going to be much less, there'll be much more interest in what works, rather than um, who's popular, when we have that kind of a brass tack on the ground. Um, but
yeah.
um, hopefully
Yeah,
there'll be more openness of facilitating about like what those causal dynamics were. But it's hard. It's a yeah. I mean, life is like you
well,
said, go time.
it's go well, that time is here, and if you look into more the energetic, spiritual aspect of things, like several wisdom traditions believe that, around 2020, we are going to take this dip into the land of lies, moving into the era of truth. And we are moving into the time where all lies will be reviewed and all truth will be available. And I trust that that will shake itself out. And I trust that every bit of this is a natural part of the process, in order to get back into connection with stewardship of the land. And we're already starting to see, you know, uh, some of these popular ideas, um, not make it, um, and not only not make it, fail miserably, which is not a new trend, right? So some of the things that you and I have talked about with regards to soil biology, there's been some people make shift to the soil biology world and actually go out of business, and we are sympathetic to that as a reality. We're seeing this. A lot of people go out of business following some of these new popular trends. And I keep the poster behind me. This is, I worked through Dr. Elaine's classes and did so well at my classes that I got invited into the inner circle. And so that's actually the poster that used to go up at her. That's actually her poster. And I have two of her tea brewers, at our warehouse. So I have a tea brewer that was built in, like, I don't know, 1997 or something like that. that was Dr. Elaine's, and I've got a little 20-gallon tea brewer um, that she used to use up at the ECI farm. And so, I have an extremely um, fond memories and experience of working directly with Elaine Ingham, the human. Not the Soil Food Web School. I'm not with them. I don't have. I've withdrawn my support of the Soil Food Web School itself. But if we were in a room of people and someone came in with a gun, I would step in front of a bullet for Elaine Ingham, the human. And I continue to try and be an advocate for principles of soil biology, and those tend to be, just like Albrecht experienced, very attacked, very subverted, and very direct actions to try and muddy and confuse that world. And what's interesting is what I observe is the net effect of that is, especially in large scale food farming, they have an odd relationship with soil biology, and it tends to rest primarily in packaged bacteria or just mycorrhizal spores. I've seen in my work where people are putting mycorrhizal spores on brassicas, which causes them to be attacked by pests. And so even just like a misunderstanding of where those things need to go, but everybody wants to bathe in mycorrhizal spores, even if it's not appropriate for that crop. And there's a lot of conversation in agriculture in general about organisms, and everybody wants to talk about biology, but we see very few people actually measure them, right? And I think part of that's in due to the way Dr. Elaine approached the space. So I think that some of that was self-inflicted, personally. But do you see anyone in your travels that is actually managing a full soil food web and taking into account the organisms that are associated with plant growth, or do you see mostly people kind of relying on the Haney tests and these other kind of agricultural strategies? Or what do you like? What do you see out there?
um, well, there certainly are a bunch of people who have taken the soil food web,
Mhm.
courses and are very passionate about that. Um, I don't. I kind of want to ask you why you said you're not affiliated with Soil Food Up School anymore, because that was a very clear statement
That
that
was,
I think comes from a certain specific place. But
yeah.
um, I don't know if you want to respond to that question, or I can just keep going.
No, I mean, I probably should address it. I really try to be really careful because, again, like I got brought into Elaine Ingham's world, right? I've sit
Yeah,
at the table in her home, drinking porters, talking about the universe, and I have an extremely fond appreciation of that. Like when I was growing up, I was a really smart kid, but I struggled with school. I was constantly in trouble. I was getting kicked out. I was getting suspended. But at the same time, 3 times I won first place in the entire state of California for my science project. So it was like a really interesting experience with the learning for me. I ultimately went to junior college and then went to a college and got a degree, and never felt like a teacher ever took an actual interest in me and in my learning. And it mostly was like punishment. And it was
yeah.
mostly stop asking questions. Like I challenged teachers. I'd be like, I
I,
would challenge them, right? And they did not like that. And
yep.
I
Some do. Some real teachers do, but
right.
most people up in front of the class do not appreciate when you break from the
Oh, totally,
syllabus, or the
totally.
kids in the class either.
Nobody appreciated my approach to the learning process and made it all the way through higher learning, earned a degree, and it was Elaine Ingham, the human, that brought me in. And she allowed me to challenge her. She allowed me to challenge the narrative, and instead of fighting that, instead of suppressing it, instead of putting it in the corner, she watered it. And so she took me from a really talented hydroponic hoodlum from the hood and turned me into a professional advisor that has led some of the most influential farms on the planet. And for that experience, I will always defend her in some respects. The problem has become is, now there's this new school, which there are people in this school that are literally attacking us and literally attacking our contribution to the soul food web space. They're denying it, which previously to the new school, that stuff happened like you would be attacked online. Now you're being attacked from the inside. And people are being sold this narrative that, Scott and Sara went through this class and are these world-class students and we made them. And it's like, no, you were a point in that, and you were a point in that process. And actually it was Elaine Ingham herself that took all the breadth of knowledge that Sara and I had and focused it into a professional package that led farms through data, right? And so people are going through the school thinking that if they take this, now $10,000 class, that they're going to pop out the other side and are going to be a successful business and are going to successfully guide farms. And I don't personally believe many people coming out of school are actually given a full comprehensive set of tools that allows you to successfully guide farms. And it's become very religiosity, and it's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
and it's just, man, and it's just like, I try not to speak positively about this because I don't want to detract from that movement, but at a certain point, enough's enough. You know what I mean? And it's just, there,
Well,
there was,
Jesus was a great guy, but the Crusades were
yeah,
not very, much in line with what Jesus was talking about.
yeah,
And I mean, there's a difference between the teacher and
right,
um, the system that comes together around that teacher.
yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, I mean,
yeah,
I feel like, again, I think I respect the fact that she was one of the first people as a real
yeah,
scientist to say microbes are beneficial to plants, not
right,
detrimental. Because as I understand the story, like 40, 50 years ago, like everybody thought fungus was bad.
right,
She's like, no, actually, no.
yeah,
but but again, to the point about the Albrecht and the mineral balancing and the
hmm,
microbes and minerals side, it feels like it is quite dogmatic.
yeah,
This the read I get from people who are in that community is, you don't need minerals. It's all about the microbes. And it's like, I agree, it's all about the microbes, but if they don't have some minerals to build their bodies out of, they can't exist. And so, um,
yeah.
yeah, it's the
What,
problem, I
what,
guess, when you
what,
do a good job marketing yourself and have your shtick, and you just like
yeah,
and get people to follow you, then who don't necessarily have enough context to know that there's wisdom there, but also some empty spaces. Yeah,
which is, I think, which I feel is what, here with this show and with what we're doing is to usher in this new era of, I personally believe we're moving out of the guru era and moving into the empowered individual, which requires examining these blind spots. Like all of these
yeah.
previous gurus have significant blind spots. The unique aspect of what Sara and I have done is we've put the rubber to the road. People come out, the most common question we get from people coming out of the Soul Food Web School is biology all you need? Day one, Sara and I applied that concept to see if it was true, found out immediately it's not true. It's not only not true, it's the opposite of that. And if you properly apply the biological principles and bring those levels up to a high degree, you accelerate plant growth so rapidly that you actually deplete the minerals faster. And if there's any deficiencies, there's a short-term correction and a long-term radical magnification of that. And so I think it was important in the evolution of agriculture for Dr. Elaine to say biology is all you needed to start the conversation of how they fit into the process. But with all due respect, I think you're an idiot if you try to only do one thing. You know what I mean? Like you
But like
can't.
we said, all it's dangerous when you say all, right? You said that earlier. Like, if I
Yeah.
mean, it could easily be framed, biology is a critical piece of the puzzle,
Yes.
and that would be the thoughtful way to frame it, as opposed
Hmm.
to biology is all you need.
Right.
It's like foliar sprays is all you need,
Hmm.
as opposed to foliar sprays are a critical piece of the puzzle. Like, it's this sort of like silver bullet mentality. Like, I want to find the answer and I want to just attach to that and not have to
Yes.
think anymore. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
there's your problem.
Right.
There's your mistake.
Well, and I guess what we see emerging from this past experience is farmers that want to be um, more comprehensive and well-rounded. Like again, I came from a sports era where you went to a hitting coach, you went to a pitching coach, you went and you tried to be as well-rounded, as educated as possible, which is what I saw in you. And when we went to our workshops, I was shown the pathway towards all these other things that would turn me into a well-rounded agricultural advisor. And like the same type of gratitude I have for Dr. Elaine, I have for you because I had found Dr. Lane and I had found that lane. I had no clue where to go from management soil chemistry. I had never been introduced to any of these people. I think we maybe have heard of Arden, Dr. Arden, and that's how we found your workshop. But
Yep.
nonetheless, like you opened up a lane of all these other things that I needed to know about and started that educational journey. And here we are circling back all these years later. And um, we just need more than ever more farms that are interested in applying the principles of managing soil chemistry, that are interested in employing the principles of managing fertility, managing soil biology, and putting this holistic system together. Like, if you're going to focus only on mineral balancing and disregard the rest, I don't think that's much better than NPK chemical agriculture. If you're going to focus on biology only and disregard the rest, I don't think that's any much better. And honestly, the results in our experience show that. If you look at the top of the top, whether it's food production or whether it's biological matters, the people at the top of that heap are incorporating water chemistry, they're incorporating soil chemistry, and a lot of them are incorporating biological systems. And I personally assert that the farmers that will survive this changing climate, lack of resources, are going to need all those things to maintain viability and profit. That's my personal stance, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
So let's, I mean, we're kind of ranting back and forth
yeah,
about how people should know these, have this
yeah,
broader context, and we're both sitting with, all this knowledge, but we're not actually
let's do it.
trying to get it out there. I'm not sure, I mean, how much time we have left in this session,
Yeah,
or we want to sort of
yeah,
put
no,
our
it's
next session into that. But let's
yeah,
let's try to like share some of those key
let's do it.
pieces, and let's like go topic by topic, and what are the things that aren't being
Yes.
um, normally talked about. I'm not sure. Do you have a you want to throw a few at me to comment on,
Yeah. So,
or or
yeah, and maybe we could make an entire session on each content, each concept. Um, we got a very specific question from Daydream 805. And he says, is there any data that shows sulfur levels correlating with soil biology? And I think the general broader concept is what I'm interpreting is how do things like sulfur incorporate to the entire system, and what happens when you manage soil chemistry alongside soil biology. I have some personal opinions. I don't know if you know anything specifically about what should we be thinking about with sulfur. Um,
Yeah, I mean, as far as like people wanting citations, I'm
mhm,
not the person to ask. When it
mhm,
comes to understanding the principles of what it does and how it works, and what to how much you need and things like that, I think I'm much better.
mhm,
I use the example of converting amino acids into proteins. Like, there's a series of steps of biochemical processes that occur from like starting with basically making simple sugars to complex flavor and nutritional compounds. And um, you have to convert a sugar into a carbohydrate. When you make amino acids, you have to convert those amino acids into protein, etc. And my understanding is, among many many other things, like, you must have sulfur present for those amino acids to be converted into protein. And like, so these are critical biochemical pathways that occur in the microbe, in the plant, in the animal, etc. And you must have sufficient levels of these suite of elements for that to occur you know freely. Otherwise it's inhibited.
mhm,
And so um, yeah, that would be my understanding is that it's one of many critical elements required for life to exist. I use the example of cobalt oftentimes when I'm talking to people about that, and say there's this thing called B12, which is got one element of cobalt in the middle of it, and you can't have B12 without one atom of cobalt. And if we don't have B12 as human animals, we are dead. We must have a certain amount of B12 in our body, which is a cobalt based compound. And
mhm,
similarly with microbes, if you don't have cobalt in the environment, you don't have B12. I think it's about 80% of the species are cobalt or B12 dependent. And
right.
so, like, there's a suite of different elements that are critical for life to function, for the process of life. All the all the biochemical stuff that happens in our bodies constantly is requires different enzymes, which are based on certain elements, et cetera, to happen. Um,
Mhm.
and sulfur being an anion, which means it leaches when it rains, means that if you live in an area where it rains a decent amount, call it 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 inches a year, and your soils have been tilled, disturbed, um, are not old growth forest or original prairie, but they've been disturbed and destructed, over a couple centuries now. Um, in almost all situations like that, you're going to have low sulfur levels because what happened historically was the environmental conditions were such that the sulfur got leached out of the soil, and so um, this is just a historical fact
Mhm.
of what's occurred. And um, yeah, that's just one comment
Yeah.
there on
Yeah, no,
that
it's
specific element.
yeah, that's great stuff. And with regards to cobalt, like one of a plant's primary functions is taking sunlight energy, turning it into biomass. And in order for that sunlight energy to enter the plant, you need vitamin B12, which requires cobalt. So in order to execute its most basic intention, which is take sunlight energy and turn it into growth, you need all these things to bring it into the cells. I'm not sure how sulfur is involved with the photosynthesis process, but what I do know is that like you said, it needs to form with calcium in order to form complete proteins, which is what is required to have a pest and disease free plant. And a lot of times in our work, calcium, magnesium, potassium levels might be very high. Without the sulfur alongside it, you're not making use of any of that. And we
Hmm.
do see significant plant health problems when sulfur drops below certain levels, depending on the crop, depending on the context, whether it's native soils or engineered potting soils. There's different targets and parameters for that. But generally speaking, things start to radically fall apart, in my experience, when levels of sulfur in the soil drop below about 150 parts per million. If you look at most agricultural soils, they tend to hang around 25 to 30, right?
10, 15,
Yeah,
20.
totally.
Yeah.
And so what happens, you get stuck
You're
in
saying
this.
150, not 75?
Well, okay, so this can be a whole entire rabbit hole as far as how soil weight plays into that. And so if
Hmm.
looking at a true 2 million pound per acre slice, 75 is sufficient.
Yeah.
In my side of the country, I see a whole lot more point. Let me translate that. So in the Logan test, bulk density, the weight of your soil, in order to have a 2 million pound 6-inch slice of an acre, which is the assumption, you're looking at a bulk density on the Logan test of 1.5 grams per cubic centimeters. In my side of the world, I see more of like a point 0.8.
Yeah.
In our engineered potting soils, we see some of these really lightweight cannabis soils all the way down to like a point 0.2. The highest weight of an
Wow.
engineered potting soil I see is like a point 0.6. Excuse me. Most common
Yep.
is in like point 0.3, point 0.4 range, which that's 1/5 of,
Well,
you
let's
know,
just ignore the fake soils for a second and tell me
yeah.
about why. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't call them.
No, 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 you're good. Yeah. No,
I just got
no, no,
my
no, no,
little
it's
box I live in, which is like, if it's not part of nature, then you're probably doing something wrong. But
totally.
I mean, you can do a good job, I'm certain, in these engineered medias. Um,
Sure.
why is that soil in your area half? Why is the bulk density half? Is it
Well,
too porous? Is it more clay? More, I mean, it wouldn't be more clay, more silt, more
uh,
airspace. What would be the factor why it would be half as heavy?
yeah, I mean, it just comes down to density. And so the more smaller particles you have, the heavier that cubic centimeter is going to weigh. And so what's interesting is,
So you
and
got
this
more
is,
sandy soil then.
yeah,
Would
primarily,
be with the 0.88 or whatever would be a lot of
yes.
compost, and
Yeah,
a sandy, lighter, low CEC soil likely would be a
correct.
lighter soil. And so you're saying in that environment you need 150.
Yes, because we can make a whole segment to show this type of data, what I'm talking about. But in
Yeah, I
order,
think that'd be interesting.
yeah, in order to derive a part per million, that is 1 in 1 million. So if your assumption of a soil of a 6-inch slice weighs 2 million pounds, it takes
Per
two
acre. one
Yeah.
acre equal. If you take for people who don't know what we're talking about here,
Sorry. Yeah.
you take
Clarify.
1 acre of soil, which is
Yep.
208 by 208 feet. What is it?
43,560 square feet. Yeah.
I think it's 208 by 208 is if
Yeah.
you took a tape measure. So it's
Yes.
208 feet that way, 208 feet that way, and make a
Yeah.
square. That's 1 acre. And
Correct.
you took the top 6 inches of that. The assumption when you take soil tests is that top 6 inches is where the aerobic zone is, and it's where the root
Mhm.
zones are. It's where the plant's taking nutrients from. And so when you're doing your math to figure out how many pounds of this or how many pounds of that you need, you have to assume a certain weight of that soil. And the assumption is it weighs 2 million pounds, which is why the
Correct.
magic algorithm is parts per million times 2 equals pounds per acre. But
Yeah. So that, yes, exactly. And just this is my personal assessment is a lot of that work was done in the around Missouri and kind of those dense clay based, wherever you'd call that, Midwest, or whatever you'd term that, where Albrecht
mhm,
and doing this work. And yes, I do believe in those regions you see a lot of 2 million pound soils, which would have a bulk density of 1.5 grams per cubic centimeter, right?
okay, yeah,
And where I come from, primarily the Southwest, the Imperial Valley, to a certain extent, Salinas, Central California, and then now in Utah, that used to be an ocean. It's primarily sandier soils. I grew up on the Colorado River, which was alluvial floodplains, which is more lightweight, sandy based soils. And so the bigger the particles, the less fits in there and the less weight that soil is. So where we start to uh, try to define more specifically is 75 parts per million, which comes from the ideal soil. Yes, in a 1.5 2 million acre slice, that's more minerals than what is in my lighter weight soil because that part per million is derived with the relationship between the weight of the soil and the weight of the minerals. So in my soils being 40% lighter, I need to have 40% more parts per million to hit the same contribution of minerals, if that makes sense.
seems totally counterintuitive. Seems like if you had less.
Right. So this is where it gets confusing because you would think that, well, let's talk about maybe grams of elements. So
Well, I
grams,
think, I mean, isn't a bunch of it have to do with surface area and, I mean, exchange capacity? We're not involving exchange capacity here as
which
part
is
of
a
this
whole
conversation.
different, yeah, which is a whole different consideration of it is in order to hold on to a large quantity of minerals, there needs to be a place to adhere to, which is
Precisely,
the
which is not a
exchange.
sandy soil, right?
Correct. Correct. Yes. And so there's a couple considerations there is one is just the raw weight of minerals in that soil, which is compared to the weight of the soil, which derives concentration. So if the same, raw volume of sulfur is in two different soils, yes, it will be more concentrated in the lighter soil. So it gets to be an extreme rabbit hole of understanding, but
I think we should plan
yeah,
next time we do this to have a big whiteboard
yes,
and actually go back and forth and do it kind of slow and write it down, because I mean we're talking about the fact that we know all this stuff and people should know it, and we're not actually teaching it. We're not actually
mm,
walking through it in a way that people can have access to the real stuff.
yes,
Because I mean, if that's
mm,
the critique, let's do something about it. If
yeah,
we think we know better, let's
yeah,
let's tell people what we know instead of just sitting back on our laurels and saying, yeah, yeah, all those people don't know what they're talking about.
yeah, yeah.
Like, it's our
Yeah.
job to change that. Yeah.
I love spring. I would love to expand this concept because that's one thing. Well, soil chemistry in general is fairly mystical to most people. But when you start to really hammer home to the specifics of what produces raw yield, right? So the way that I look at it on the simple takeaway from this long digression we're on is I look at three basic components of the agricultural process that produces output. So I think of it as a slingshot. So we got the base of our catapult is soil fertility. The larger the quantity of minerals you have in your soil, the bigger the base of that catapult is, the more balanced it is, the bigger that base is. The bigger the base is, the larger you can launch a rock, right? And then the arm of that catapult is your fertilization strategy. So your soil feeds, your foliar feeds, your general nutrition. The better you're at that, the longer the arm, the farther you can throw a rock. And then the speed of that conversion is the biological aspect. So, in order to get quality, productivity, and reduction in pest and disease, it's a balance of these three components that leads to productivity. So, soil chemistry contributes undeniably to raw productivity.
Yeah.
It can affect quality. Obviously, the more balanced you get an increase in quality, you get a decrease in pest, but you cannot fertilize yourself to the yields that are produced with soil minerals. You cannot foliar feed your.
That's so true. I mean,
No.
you get the minerals down and just
Mhm,
if
mhm,
people are doing a decent job otherwise with like decent job with soil management
mhm,
and they I've just seen this so many times and they get their all mineral balancing done, it's like their yields
mhm.
go through the roof,
They do.
through the roof. So, but
Mhm.
where does organic matter fit in this context of yours?
Well, in my experience, we have one particular case study where we did not we Sara drove this.
Mhm.
It was Sarah's work. Maybe she'll talk about it someday. But we had a 4 acre cannabis property that the front half had organic matter applied the previous year. So the front half had 3 to 4.5% organic matter. The back half had 0.6 to 1% organic matter.
This is land we're
This
talking
is just
about.
this is in ground
Yeah.
agricultural scale row crop style cannabis production.
And it was between zero point 0.6 and 1 originally.
So
Okay,
the
that's pretty
front
bad.
the front lot. So the native soil in that region, heavily abused farming region in Central California, had zero point 0.5, less than 1%, we'll say.
Yep, yep, yep.
Um, the section that had compost applied the previous year was in the 3.5 to 4.5% organic matter, right?
Yep.
So there's a literal line in this field that they expanded to, and the fertilization was the same. The compaction treatments we did to the soil were the same. Fertilization was the same. Foliar feeding was the same. Genetics were the same. So everything was the same except this organic matter aspect. The section of the farm that had 3.5 to 4% doubled the production of the back half. Literally straight hardcore
Yep.
double, double.
So I'm that's why I brought it
Mhm.
up because that I didn't
Yeah,
hear it in your
yeah.
catapult ecosystem
Well,
or your.
I guess if you refine down to the base of the catapult, organic matter is a percentage of that. And so, what
Well,
we
you said it was the minerals was the base.
yeah, the soil itself is the base, and nothing we do from soil biology to fertilization to foliar feeding will outperform the raw yield production that the soil itself provides. And I can
Yeah.
show with math that it comes down to grams of element contributed to the process. You cannot fertilize the amount of mineral nutrition through air or through roots that comes from the dirt. Not even close. It's not even close.
But I'm just accentuating the point that it's not just the minerals. There's a
100%.
critical role for the organic quotient, and
Yes.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And the way that plays into engineered soils is our cannabis work where we're required to take track and trace data. So even leaf material that we pull off that's not sold, we're required to weigh, document, and submit. So we have massive piles of data of above ground biomass that comes from the agricultural process, right? It's remarkable the amount of data we've been forced. And those of us that have used it are in the top. When an engineered potting soil drops below 30% organic matter, you start to see a reduction in yield with all things being equal. When that engineered potting soil drops below 20%, there's a very measurable reduction with all things being equal. And so in a potting soil, you really need to keep it because it's not natural components. It's peat moss, it's pumice, it's not natural soil
It's not
characteristics.
soil. Yeah.
It's not soil. So it requires essentially 10 times the organic matter to hold the minerals functionally in the soil to have access to the plant. And so what I understand, the clay holds on to the positively charged elements, and the organic holds on to positively and negatively charged elements. So you
Right.
need relationship between actual clay and organic matter in order to functionally hold mineral nutrition in the root zone of the plant to have access to
Right.
it.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So,
All right.
man,
This is a great one.
yeah, we've gone down the rabbit hole. We're getting close to 2 hours. We should probably wrap it up. I think we're
Yeah.
getting pretty seat tired, and I like your idea. I would love to spend an entire hour talking about soil chemistry and showing. We do need to get off.
Let's not talk
Yeah,
about it. Let's actually
yes,
explain what we think we understand. Like, let's
I agree.
provide some serious, like,
Yeah,
value. I think that would be the thing to do. Would be to sort of wrap on the things we understand. And I mean, I'm thinking about a whiteboard, or
yeah,
writing some things down so people can see
hmm,
numbers, and trying to
yeah.
turn it into something educational. Instead of,
I,
I mean, it's nice. I enjoy rapping with you, but I feel like there's
I do.
much more we could do than complain
Right.
from our high horses.
I agree. No,
Uh,
and that's important. If we're going to assert that the current issue is not putting the rubber where the road is, then we need to do just that. And so, right,
that's my yeah, exactly. That's my point.
yeah, you're
No,
right.
it's great. Took us 6 hours to come to that realization,
Yeah.
but
Hey, no, hey, I never
step by
profess.
step, baby.
I never profess to magically know all the solutions. We got to start where we're at. We got to work through the process, and
Yeah, yeah.
we got to start somewhere. And we got the conversation started. I think we're both hearing we need to get to the meat of it. So, for those of you that have stuck through this long, that are following along on the live stream, we appreciate you for joining live. We appreciate your comments and contents that keeps this show moving in the direction it needs to go. If you missed the live stream, drop the comments and we will circle back and answer your questions. Please let us know in the comments section what you'd like to hear from us. I think we're going to take this into the next sessions of speaking specifically about soil chemistry, soil biology, and fertilization and water chemistry. Let us know what you think. Let us know what you want
And
to
all
hear.
the other broader insights
Mhm.
from the biological perspective. There's
Yeah.
so many other pieces we can get into of early childhood development and seed
Mhm.
quality, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of nuances we can talk about. I think,
Yes.
um,
Yeah. Yes.
paramagnetism and who knows what all.
There's so, so many aspects that provide value to the
let's
agriculture.
let's let's walk through all the things that we think people should
Oh,
know. That'll be great fun. That could keep us busy for a while.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Well,
yeah, and
thanks a lot, Scott.
I think here in the future we're going to try and get you out in the real world talking to people. So when's your next? You're going to hit the road pretty hard here pretty soon. Where are you going to?
Next week from today is Vermont. Week after that is Minnesota. I think the week after that is Pennsylvania. It might be Missouri.
Hmm.
Um, and then after that, I think it's Cornwall, and then England, and then Wales, and then Ireland, and then it's the other one from Missouri or Pennsylvania. I don't remember. Yeah, it's the winter. It's the winter. Farmers are going to conferences,
Let's
and
do it.
people want to check out the BFA, social posts, so you can see the events or the BFA calendar if you want to
Yeah.
get together in person. Bionutrient.org.
Bionutrient.org. All right. Well, if you're in those regions where Dan's going to be, link up with us. Where I think we're going to try and incorporate some of this into the live stream. We got to figure out some
Yeah,
logistics on that. But if you're going to be at these events where Dan is going to be, try to find this man. We'll try and get you on the show and get tapped into the heart of the farmers in the world right now. And so thank you for joining, Dan. Thank you for coming on here. This is really good. Really stretches my wings and challenges me to step up to the next level of professionalism and production quality. It's time to go, man. So I appreciate
awesome.
your commitment to the process and I appreciate your commitment to farmers in general. That was good stuff. Until next time.
Au revoir. Be well.